When Hernan Cortes and his crew started arriving in what is Mexico today, what is it that made them able to conquer an empire as vast, as sophisticated, and as powerful as the Aztec Empire? Some would say diseases or the superior military technology of the Spaniards, but many would underestimate the role that indigenous people themselves played in the fall of the empire. And in fact, Cortes was able to establish key alliances with many indigenous people who wanted to see the fall of Moctezuma, the leader of the Aztecs. One of these key allies were Tlaxcala, one of the few who resisted Aztec expansion. In this video, I'll give you an overview of Tlaxcala, who these people are, and the role they played in the conquest of the Aztec Empire. The Aztec Empire started to develop itself in the 1400s, expanding throughout parts of what is modern central Mexico today. The empire reached its peak under Moctezuma in the early 16th century, just before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors. However, amid all of this expansion, there was Tlaxcala. Tlaxcala, meaning land of bread, were a Nahua people who spoke Nahuatl, just like the Aztecs, and had a population of about 150,000 to 300,000 people. The Tlaxcalans were fierce military people, and they were the sworn enemies of the Aztecs, one of the few who were able to resist Aztec domination. However, they became completely surrounded by the empire and were under some sort of Aztec blockade, but amid all of this, they managed to survive, and that probably contributed to how just freaking tough they were. The Aztec Empire maintained control over its territories through a tribute system where the conquered cities would be required to pay taxes in the forms of goods or labor, just like we know it, but also by providing people for sacrifices. And all of these tributaries had been conquered within the past 100 years, so their loyalty level wasn't very high, especially given the fact that they were giving away people as a form of tax for sacrifices. So it's not surprising that many of the conquered cities within the Aztec Empire actually wanted to see the fall of the Aztec themselves. And all of this would come to a head when the Spaniards started arriving. In February of 1519, this guy, Hernan Cortes, assembled a group of 600 men, 11 ships, and a couple horses, and left Cuba to find gold in Mexico. Cortes's fleet first landed on the island of Cozumel, where they encountered the Mayans, and they actually had a peaceful encounter over there, but they acquired a crucial asset, a guy named Jeronimo de Aguilar, who was a Spanish castaway who got stranded on that island. He actually lived with the Mayans for a couple of years. He learned their languages. Cortes and his crew, they found him and would serve as a translator between the Mayan people and the Spaniards. The journey continued, and they landed in Potonchan, fought with more Mayans, they made peace, and then were given slaves as gifts, as was done back in the day, I guess. One of these slaves would be a woman named Doña Marina, or La Malinche, as she's known in Mexico. She could speak Mayan and Nahuatl, and would serve as a translator during the whole time for Cortes. And then in June 1519, they arrived in Zempoala, the land of the Totonacs. They had just been recently conquered by the Aztecs, and they gave Cortes invaluable insights into the state of the empire. It was big, Moctezuma was powerful, but in reality the fabric of the empire was totally weak. During their stay in Zempoala, it turned out that a couple of Aztec diplomats, tax collectors we can call them too, the modern version of the CRA today, they came up to Zempoala to collect their taxes, basically their people that they were going to sacrifice. But Cortes, he told them, no, don't do that. And he actually threw them in a Zempoalan jail as a show of defiance. And this event changed the perception of what was possible for the Totonacs of Zempoala, because they saw this figure in Cortes, this white guy with a beard, who could defeat the Aztecs, who could actually stand up to them, and gave them hope of a liberation. Cortes wanted to go to Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, to meet this Moctezuma, see this massive city, kingdom, feared leader in the middle of this lake. But in order for him to do so, he needed an army of people, not just his 500, 600 Spaniards and a couple of horses, compared to Tenochtitlan that had a population anywhere from 200,000 to even 400,000 people. So he asked the Totonacs who could help them, and they responded, Tlaxcala, some of the only people the Aztecs couldn't conquer. So Cortes, his crew, accompanied by the Totonacs, made their way to Tlaxcala. His army now had 400 Spanish soldiers, 15 horses, 1,300 Zempoalan warriors, but they were far from being welcomed with open arms by Tlaxcala. From the standpoint of Tlaxcala, they were seeing these strange white guys with beards and these massive animals, which were horses that they had actually never seen before, approaching them. And they were there with the Totonacs, who were part of the Aztec Empire, so they were probably thinking these are some allies that we've never seen before of the Aztecs. So they sent in an army of 30,000 people to attack the Spaniards. And this would become known as the 1 week war between Cortes and Tlaxcala. But after a bit, the Tlaxcalans, they recognized that these people weren't simply another indigenous nation civilization, they were completely different. They had these weird weapons, steel armor that protected them from their arrows and their darts, these huge animals that they used to blitz them. There wasn't any real way to counter the Spaniards, so instead they decided to settle for peace and invite them into their city. And so for 20 days, Cortes and his army stayed in Tlaxcala, and they started having cultural exchanges. Tlaxcalans started offering some of their women for marriage. They also allowed the Spaniards to plant a cross, pray, and stopped even practicing sacrifices at the request of Cortes. Cortes also had access to all this knowledge on the Aztecs from Tlaxcala, as they had fought them constantly over the past century. He got to know what kind of military strategy he should use, what were the tactics of the Aztecs, their strength, their weaknesses. Probably more important than anything, the Spaniards now had a base of operation where they could heal their wounds, their horses, and replenish their forces, and just taken how freaking crazy and insane this journey was. Tlaxcala would play a major role in the fall of the Aztec Empire and become one of their most loyal allies for the next 300 years. So from there, they would start their march to Tenochtitlan, and the Tlaxcalans provided them about 6,000 warriors who could guide them throughout not only this new land, but this cultural landscape that they were now encountering. Cortes and Tlaxcala would make a name for themselves pretty quick throughout the empire. As on their march there, they stopped in Cholula, which was a religious center of not only the Aztec Empire, but of Mesoamerica. And while they were initially received peacefully, they actually massacred thousands of Cholulans under the pretext that they were plotting against them. Moctezuma back in Tenochtitlan, he knew about all of this, and he just waited for the arrival of these strange white-looking dudes with their bitter enemies, the Tlaxcalans. They would arrive in Tenochtitlan in November 1519, seeing this city which was set in the middle of a lake with a huge population and the most powerful ruler of the land, Moctezuma. And the fall of the Aztecs wasn't something that happened right away. It took course over a period of almost a year and a half from that moment on. So they arrived first in November, like I said, and they stayed in Tenochtitlan until June 1520. In between that time, they quote-unquote arrested Moctezuma, but they still let him be the ruler of the city, so they just used him as a puppet of some sort. The Aztec nobility eventually got pissed off that their sworn enemies, Tlaxcala and the Spaniards, were indirectly ruling over them, and it eventually led to the Spaniards being kicked out during the Noche Triste on June 30th, 1520. The Aztecs killed 450 Spanish soldiers and 4,000 Tlaxcalans. Keep in mind that they had gone there with 6,000 and killed 4,000 of them. On July 8th, they had the Battle of Atumba, where Cortes and the rest of the Tlaxcalans managed to resist 200,000 Aztec warriors who were going after them. Probably the whole city. So after they got kicked out, their place of refuge would be Tlaxcala. Without Tlaxcala, it would have been impossible for the Spaniards to survive long term in Aztec land. So it was from there that Hernan Cortes prepared a proper conquest for Tenochtitlan. He would use Tlaxcalan labor to build brigantines and canoes, which would be used on Lake Texcoco to flank all the other states around the city. He also brought in reinforcements and material from Villarrica that would be hauled by Tlaxcalan labor too. Weapons, gunpowder, more horses. So Tlaxcala was the base of operations for all of this planning. By December of the same year, they were fully prepared to conquer Tenochtitlan. So in December of 1520, with an army of 600 Spanish soldiers backed by more than 100,000 indigenous warriors from Tlaxcala and Zempoala, Cortes set off on a journey to overthrow the Aztecs. By May of 1521, they had systematically conquered most of the Aztec lands and were imposing an embargo on Tenochtitlan. Ultimately, who was imposing that embargo? It was Tlaxcala. Tlaxcala was providing not only the bulk of their warriors, but they were the ones who were manning the canoes and the brigantines that were used to enforce the embargo. It would only take 3 months for Tenochtitlan to finally fall, the end of the Aztec Empire, and a huge part of that came from the role of Tlaxcala. Having played that key role, Tlaxcala got a lot of benefits from the Spanish monarchy. Under their rule for 300 years, they didn't pay taxes, they had access to horses, they were allowed to have weapons, and they even took part in conquest of other parts of America with the Spaniards. And as the Spaniards expanded their territory, Tlaxcalans were even sometimes used to resettle in these newly conquered areas to help sort of secure and populate these regions. A lot of them had converted to Christianity, and they were seen as a good example to be shown to all these new conquered people. Tlaxcala even today maintains relatively the same borders that it had. It's the smallest state in Mexico and has kept a lot of their cultural heritage. And speaking for myself, actually having gone there, the way they reflect on the heritage of their alliance with Tlaxcala is both judged positively and negatively, because on the one hand they were liberating themselves from Aztec oppression. So in Mexico today they're sort of viewed or judged negatively because they were the allies of the invaders. But at the same time today there's a statue in Tlaxcala of Xicotencatl, one of their military leaders, one of the few who resisted or didn't want to have an alliance with the Spaniards. He was actually executed by Cortes in 1521 under the pretext that he was betraying him. And on the statue it says Xicotencatl, the one who defended Tlaxcalan sovereignty before the Spanish invasion and died in May 1521, refusing the alliance with the foreigners. So from that perspective, it seems like they're celebrating or embracing each different perspective that people hold on their heritage, and that's nice. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe for more content like this. Follow me on my other platforms. I'd appreciate it a lot. Thank you for all the support, and I'll see you at the next one. Thank you.